Okay, your hub of all movement is your pelvis. So if you're not able to stabilize in your pelvis, you can't move and stabilize above or below that. So that's why we put so much focus on what your pelvis is doing, because that's where movement emanates from. So when you think of your pelvis, so when I talk pelvis, I'm talking about your two like winged bones here that attach down at your pubic bone, and then they also attach to your sacrum, so the bottom of your spine. So there's your SI joints, is kind of the attachment point of these two pelvic bones. Right now, what happens with your pelvis is when you lack stability, there's a number of compensations that can happen. So you can sit flared, you can sit in, those bones can sit high, they can rotate, they can twist. So, or you can have all of those combined in some sort of fashion. And what happens is your hip socket tends to get glued to your pelvis. So then when you go to rotate your hip, you actually end up moving your pelvis, which then sacrifices other areas of your body. So the most common thing that we see a lot of people work from is what we call jazz hands. So it's when your pelvis bone goes into this flared out state because your hips are now glued to your pelvis, and anytime you create like a conscious effort to use anything down here, it's coming from either that flared, gripping, everything working type of situation, rather than your pelvis being able to stabilize and you getting the freedom of movement of your hips and the freedom of movement of your arms and your upper back. So if you kind of think of the front of your pelvis being these two bones, right, you want them to point on the road. And for most of us, we're pointing in the ditch, which is what we call jazz hands. So what you need to do is to bring stability to your pelvis so that your hips can open up. So when you live in jazz hands, which is, I'm exaggerating it, but you're here, you can see how for me to do hip range of motion, it's really restricted. But if I actually put myself in a neutral pelvis, it gives my hips the freedom to move, and then you're actually able to stabilize through your pelvis with freedom.